Hello, and welcome back to the MCYT Metazine. I'm Rez, and with me today, I've got Frostbyte Freeman, whose piece covers Whitepine's metatext as seen through Langer's lens of film theory. How did you decide what topic you wanted to analyze for this zine?
This is actually the first zine I've ever been a part of. I was so new to the whole thing that I actually had to look up how to pronounce the word before sitting down to do this interview. And when my friend Solar sent me the application form knowing that this might be something up my alley, I knew the second I saw it exactly what I wanted to write about. I have myself a little YouTube channel, and last winter I did two of my longest and most involved videos ever on analyzing the metatext of Whitepine. And what went unsaid in both of those videos was this sort of conceptual framework that was underpinning my entire analysis, or that had subtly influenced the conclusions I came to on Whitepine. I never brought it up in the course of those videos because they were bloated and self-indulgent enough as it was, but I thought that this would be the perfect forum to share that sort of stuff, since those reading this zine would likely be here for that sort of stuff specifically and wouldn't be turned away by me getting hyper-specific on this super niche metatextual issue.
What would you most like for people to take away from your piece?
My hope is that the people who read this piece come away from it with a new, or maybe if not new, then at least renewed appreciation for filmmaking and its various techniques. The goal was, in writing this essay, to give the reader some sort of formal technical apparatus in analyzing the medium of the moving image that they might not have had before. Sometimes, in isolation, this sort of stuff that I'm talking about here can sound sort of stodgy or overly complex or pretentious or, what have you. But maybe if you read this piece and then you go back and you rewatch Whitepine, some of it will click into place and you'll realize that this is just a formal write-up for the instinctive rules that explain how meaning is perceived and created in film. And hopefully, with those new tools added to your toolbox, you'll be able to view all sorts of things in a whole new light. That's the hope, anyways.
What are you proudest of in this piece?
The ending. I think I'm proudest of the conclusion. The overarching structure of this essay can be fairly ambulatory. But by the end, I think it sort of came together in such a way that you can tell that while the series' primary auteur has obviously given a lot of thought to the weighting of symbolism and composition and narrative elements, ultimately she wants you to take from it what you will. And I'd like to think this piece leaves the reader in a really great place to do that and leaves them in sort of a parallel position at the end of my own writing.
Is there anything from this piece you'll be taking with you into the future?
My appreciation for Langer's view of film started long before this essay, and it'll continue long after it. I might sprinkle some of these ideas into another piece or a video or something on my channel, maybe continue that train of thought. This is the sort of stuff that I personally enjoy talking and thinking and theorizing and, I guess, philosophizing about the most, so that influence will continue with me long after this zine officially releases.
Is there anything else from the creative process you'd like to share? Are there any details or specific aspects of your argument you'd like to highlight?
There is this one thing. I kind of glossed over it in the conclusion since I was already imposing quite the onerous strain upon the word count that the organizers sort of kindly allowed me to play with, but I mentioned very briefly my previous position on how Whitepine and Ivory's hidden videos on her second channel sort of interlink. I think those hidden videos provide meta-commentary on Ivory's struggles as a creative, a creator, and as a woman. Repeatedly, Ebony, who is her alter ego in that timeline, presses Ivory on her past deeds, asking if she still wants to be that killer, because in her Minecraft videos, she's sort of perceived as this goddess of PvP whose mission is to kill literally everyone. At the same time, she is this goddess of either PvP or filmmaking, depending on who you ask, but she's also just a woman. And, isn't that enough? I sort of sense this implicit tension there between these two different forms of life, where Ivory as an auteur is torn between traditional YouTube and Minecraft content, and this innate desire she has to create, to make something more. And all of that exists amidst the backdrop of her particular path that she's taken to get to this point in her content creation journey, so there's a lot of very heavily weighted paratext there. But again, this is all just paratext, it just sort of surrounds the main text of the work. And so much of it is left open to the point where viewers can read Ebony and Ivory's dialogues in whatever way they so choose, so long as it's, still supported by the core contentions of the text. That, however, was, my view, and it was what made me so interested in the metatextual ramifications of Whitepine in the first place. So I just thought this interview would be a really great opportunity to flesh out that position for those people who are reading the essay and they haven't, seen my 2 hours of previous analysis on Whitepine.
In your video essays, you often draw on styles of film directors. Were you drawing on any analytical or literary styles for this analysis?
Funnily enough, despite primarily citing Langer, I was kind of drawing on the work of another philosopher to shape the style of this essay. that being the later work of Ludwig Wittgenstein of Philosophical Investigations. Wittgenstein has this major emphasis in investigations on this writing style that's prone to digression and rhetorical questions, because what he's trying to accomplish in that text, he's arguing that he can't explain the central problem at the heart of all philosophy on a regular, straightforward treatise, and so his writings take this ambulatory, winding, loosely structured form. I think you can see his influence emerging most clearly in the fourth section of this piece. Wittgenstein believed in taking a tour of the full landscape of a problem, diving down one wooded path and emerging out from another in order to truly see a thing from as many points of view as possible. I've analyzed Whitepine in a lot of different ways in my prior work on YouTube, and this piece was meant to sort of provide a top-down perspective to guide readers on their own exploration of the landscape of Whitepine, as it were. After all, my ultimate contention here in this essay is that any conclusions on Whitepine must ultimately be one's own.
Even back in your analysis of B-Dub's playstyle, you mentioned your idea of player as camera, something that is key to Whitepine's creation and your analysis of it. Where did that idea come from?
That idea of player as camera actually did come from Suzanne Langer too. Not very original, I know, but she was very foundational for me. Maybe with a bit of Ralph Emerson thrown in there for good measure. Langer is very big on the moving camera, as section 3 of my essay explains why, and this sort of idea of an apparitional camera is echoed in the Emerson essay experience. Ghost like we glide is his exact phrasing, but that entire essay, which was written after the passing of his very young son, is him ruminating on how we experience life itself. Our experience, to Emerson, is always sort of shifting as we stroll through life, refracted through the multicolored glass lenses and beads of distortion we call mood and emotion as they're strung up on a thin steel firmament. We reach for something solid and constant in this life, but the anchorage is quicksand, only an illusion. I'm paraphrasing here. But with B-Dubs, I think the idea of player's camera is much more apparent because he's building on a server where other players can explore his builds for themselves. He uses Minecraft more as a medium for painting, albeit pixelated paintings in the third dimension, so even light and shadow are baked into his blocky designs and decisions. Ivory, by contrast, is less of a painter and more of a photographer. Maybe cinematographer is a better word for it, actually, but she's capturing her creation in such a way that player as camera is more metaphorical than it is literal for her. The angles and compositions of Whitepine make you feel like you're an unseen player stalking the Hemlock House, even though that isn't literally the case.
In your video dissecting the symbolism of Whitepine, you again divide Ivory into 3: Frill Ivory, Whitepine Ivory, and Ivory the Artist. Would you now, with the assertion that there are 3 Whitepine Ivories, Ivory the character, Ivory the actress, and Ivory the artist, release the religious imagery of the 3-in-1 in your analysis? Or are they, to you, 2 separate trios that both support the 3-in-1 concept?
That is a very interesting question to try and untangle. They're not 2 separate trinities, not entirely, per se. I think, if I had to offer my suspicions, they're linked in the way that I've long theorized that the hidden videos in Whitepine itself are. My position holds that the hidden videos and all the videos on the Ivory Frill channel, since they stem from the content creation efforts of their creator, exist in a sort of separate continuity from the self-contained narrative of Whitepine. But this separate continuity is still linked to Whitepine because these videos provide metatextual commentary on the themes of the show and the story surrounding its creation, how it came to be. In that sense, I think that the trinity of Ivory that spans across character, actress, and artist kind of functions exactly like the Catholic conception of Christ does, which sounds completely normal and not at all bonkers now that those words have officially been said out loud. But the Nicene Creed holds that Jesus was both fully God and fully human, and in a very similar way, you can split the concept of Ivory the character into the twin facets of Frill Ivory and Whitepine Ivory. So basically, the Ivory became the incarnation after killing God. Literally. I guess that's my argument. Now, granted, I don't take the whole Trinity metaphor too seriously myself, and your mileage with it will vary. I only really introduced it as a means of sort of orienting the viewer, or in the case of this essay, reader's perspective, on the different overlapping layers that compose Ivory's work, since it can be kind of hard to map that stuff conceptually. There's so much of it coming at you all at once. Regardless of how overwrought that framing device may be, though, you can't deny that Whitepine and its paratextual complements are very much steeped in religious iconography already, so at the very least, I think it's, sort of fitting.
Of course, you're quite experienced with creating video essays, and recently you've made several on Whitepine specifically. How was it different to write an essay for this zine without designing your own video for it? Was it easier or harder than writing a video essay?
It was, It was honestly kind of liberating, to tell you the truth. My Whitepine videos in particular were probably the most time-intensive and high-effort stuff I've ever made for my channel. In the process of filming for the narrative-based framing device that binds both of those analyses together, I had to learn how to use countless commands and mods and stuff, how to do things with Axiom and Flashback and mocap, and how to install shaders, and all sorts of things that I had never done before in my entire time playing the game of Minecraft. So there was a pretty steep learning curve there, but even in videos that don't have technical challenges like those or don't involve a more ponderous, weighty narrative framing to them, there's always still an element of entertainment value you have to consider when making a YouTube video. I wouldn't say that my stuff is super well optimized for the algorithm or for algorithmic success, to be frank, nor do I really want it to be. My editing isn't punchy or flashy, my setup isn't the most professional, and my thumbnails aren't the most clickable. I'm recording this in my closet right now. I don't do the whole, subscriber stats spiel, but in spite of how hard, I swim against the current, there's still stuff that's part and parcel with the form. There's, still that desire that you want to make something that people want to watch. Even if it's still sort of an esoteric, very singular perspective on things, you still want to be entertaining, you still kind of want to be that, funny type content guy. So for this essay, I got to completely shed all of the window dressing that goes into YouTube content creation. Hopefully you can hear the air quotes that went into my tone there. And just write a piece that stands on its own. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I hope people enjoy it for that and for what it is.
Well, thank you very much for joining me. You can check out Frost's piece and all the other pieces for the MCYT Metazine when it releases. See you then.